Welcome to our NREMT review series. These videos are intended to help prepare you for taking the NREMT exam at all levels. In this review, we will give a brief overview of action potentials along with the sodium-potassium pump. We will break the video down into three main sections: overview, definitions, and understanding. Why you will need to know this at each provider level. Along the way, we will dig into some pharmacology. We will lead off with the cell anatomy and sodium-potassium pump due to the EMT curriculum giving us a brief overview of these items. Now let's begin this incredible journey. Although the EMT curriculum doesn't do much of a deep dive at the cellular level, EMTs, emergency medical technicians, benefit from understanding cell anatomy for several reasons. Physiological understanding. Knowing cell anatomy helps EMTs understand how the body functions at a fundamental level. This knowledge enables them to comprehend how diseases or injuries might affect cellular processes, which in turn impacts organ and system function. It helps them interpret signs and symptoms observed in patients. Treatment and assessment. Understanding cell anatomy aids EMTs in assessing and treating patients. For instance, knowledge of how cells generate and use energy helps in understanding conditions like diabetic emergencies or inadequate oxygenation that affect cellular function. Response to medications and interventions. Many medications and treatments used by EMTs work at the cellular level. Understanding cell anatomy allows them to comprehend how these medications act on cells, which helps in administering drugs safely and effectively. Emergency situations. In emergency situations such as trauma or cardiac events, knowledge of cell anatomy helps EMTs. Anticipate potential complications, interpret diagnostic tests like ECGs, and understand the effects of shock or tissue damage at a cellular level. Communication with healthcare providers. EMTs often work as part of a healthcare team. Understanding cell anatomy helps them communicate effectively with doctors and nurses by describing patient conditions in terms that healthcare providers can relate to and understand at a deeper level. In essence, while EMTs may not directly work on cells, understanding cell anatomy serves as a foundational knowledge base that supports their ability to assess, treat, and communicate about patient conditions effectively within the broader context of human health and disease. Here are some definitions of cellular anatomy that all EMS providers should know. Cell membrane, plasma membrane. This is the outer boundary of the cell, a thin, semi-permeable membrane that separates the interior of the cell from its external environment. It regulates the passage of substances in and out of the cell. Cytoplasm. It's the jelly-like substance that fills the cell and contains various organelles. It includes the cytosol, where many cellular activities take place. Nucleus. This is the control center of the cell. It contains genetic material, DNA, that carries instructions for cell growth, reproduction, and functioning. The nucleus is surrounded by a nuclear membrane. Organelles. These are structures within the cell that have specific functions. Mitochondria. They're the powerhouses of the cell, generating energy, ATP, through cellular respiration. Endoplasmic reticulum, ER. It's involved in protein and lipid synthesis. Golgi apparatus. It processes and packages proteins and lipids produced by the ER. Lysosomes. They contain enzymes for breaking down waste materials and cellular debris. Cytoskeleton. It provides structure, support, and helps in cell movement. The EMT curriculum does go over the sodium-potassium pump a little more. Let's break that down a bit. The sodium-potassium pump is a critical mechanism in maintaining the proper balance of sodium, Na+, and potassium, K+ ions inside and outside of cells. It's a specialized protein found in the cell membrane that actively transports these ions against their concentration gradients, requiring energy in the form of ATP, adenosine triphosphate. Here's how the sodium-potassium pump works. 3 sodium ions out, 2 potassium ions in. The pump actively moves 3 sodium ions out of the cell against their concentration gradient, using energy derived from ATP. Simultaneously, it moves 2 potassium ions into the cell against their concentration gradient. Energy consumption. ATP provides the energy necessary for the pump to change its shape and move these ions against their gradients. The hydrolysis of ATP releases energy, which powers the pump's activity. Electrochemical balance. By moving more positive ions, sodium, out of the cell than it brings in, potassium, the pump contributes to maintaining a negative electrical potential inside the cell compared to the outside. This electrical potential is essential for various cellular functions, such as nerve signaling and muscle contractions. Cellular homeostasis. The sodium-potassium pump plays a vital role in maintaining proper cell volume and regulating osmotic balance. It helps prevent an excessive accumulation of sodium inside the cell, which could lead to swelling, and it regulates potassium concentrations, crucial for many cellular functions. Energy demand. The sodium-potassium pump is one of the most energy-demanding processes in the body. It's estimated that it consumes around 20–30% of the total ATP produced in the body. Why do EMTs need to know about this? The answer usually will come back to the production of ATP. Adequate production requires oxygen and glucose. Oftentimes, EMTs are called to help out with diabetic patients. Patients who are having diabetic lows may not have enough glucose to produce sufficient ATP. The same thing may happen with patients who are in respiratory distress. They may be creating ATP through anaerobic metabolism. Anaerobic metabolism is faster than aerobic metabolism, but produces less energy and can lead to the buildup of byproducts like lactic acid, causing muscle fatigue or soreness. Although this is good information for EMTs, paramedics need to have a much deeper understanding of the whole process, including action potential. Understanding the differences between neuron action potential and cardiac action potential is important. Understanding cardiac action potential in depth will not only help the paramedic with treatments for the patient, but it can also help the paramedic student understand the connections between pharmacology, rhythm interpretation, and pathophysiology. Clinical relevance. EMS personnel often deal with cardiac emergencies. Knowing the specifics of cardiac action potentials helps in understanding the mechanisms behind various heart arrhythmias and abnormalities. Differentiating these from neuronal action potentials aids in accurately diagnosing and managing cardiac conditions. Treatment and medication. Cardiac drugs and interventions target the heart's electrical activity. Knowledge of cardiac action potentials assists in comprehending how these drugs work on ion channels during depolarization and repolarization phases, facilitating informed decision-making in emergency situations. Response to stimuli. Cardiac and neuronal cells have distinct responses to stimuli due to their varied ion channel distributions and durations of action potentials. Understanding these differences aids in interpreting electrocardiograms, ECGs, and assessing abnormalities, differentiating them from nervous system-related issues. Risk assessment. Differentiating between cardiac and neuronal action potentials helps in recognizing potential risks associated with certain conditions or medications. EMS professionals need to assess risks and make rapid decisions in emergency scenarios. By comprehending these distinctions, EMS students can better evaluate and respond to cardiac-related emergencies, applying appropriate treatments and interventions effectively. Let's review the phases of the cardiac action potential. Cardiac action potential consists of several phases that represent the changes in the electrical activity of heart cells during a heartbeat. Here's a simplified overview. Phase 0, rapid depolarization. This phase involves a rapid influx of sodium ions, Na+, into the cardiac cells, leading to a sudden rise in the cell's electrical charge. It's triggered by the opening of fast sodium channels, causing the cell membrane to depolarize quickly. Phase 1, initial repolarization. In this phase, there's a brief repolarization due to a small efflux of potassium ions, K+, counteracting the initial influx of sodium. Some potassium channels open, allowing a minor outflow of potassium, which briefly reduces the cell's electrical charge. Phase 2, plateau phase. During this phase, the cell membrane remains relatively stable. Calcium ions, Ca2+, enter the cell, balancing the efflux of potassium. The influx of calcium maintains a prolonged depolarization, sustaining the cell's charge for an extended period. Phase 3 in repolarization, the influx of calcium maintains a prolonged depolarization, sustaining the cell's charge for an extended period. The reduction in the cell's charge prepares it for the next heartbeat. Phase 3, repolarization. Here, there's a significant outflow of potassium ions, mainly through potassium channels. This is the resting state of the cardiac cell, where the membrane potential is stable and ready for the next cycle of depolarization and repolarization. It maintains a negative charge inside the cell compared to the outside. These phases of the cardiac action potential are vital for the synchronized contraction and relaxation of heart muscle cells, ensuring effective pumping of blood throughout the body. Each phase is orchestrated by the opening and closing of specific ion channels, regulating the flow of ions across the cell membrane and contributing to the rhythmic beating of the heart. Here are some paramedic medications that directly affect cardiac action potential. Amiodarone, function, slows down electrical signals in the heart. Effect on action potential, stabilizes abnormal rhythms like ventricular tachycardia or fibrillation by slowing the heart's action potential conduction. Sodium channel blockers, procainamide, function, blocks sodium channels in the heart. Effect on action potential, slows down the conduction of electrical signals in the heart by inhibiting sodium influx during the action potential. Used to treat various arrhythmias. Phenytoin, function, blocks sodium channels in the heart. Effect on action potential, slows the conduction of electrical signals in the heart. At high doses, it can have anti-arrhythmic effects, although it's primarily used as an anti-epileptic. Lidocaine, function, blocks sodium channels in the heart. Effect on action potential, helps normalize irregular heart rhythms by inhibiting sodium influx during the action potential, which can suppress certain ventricular arrhythmias. Calcium channel blockers, diltiazem, function, blocks calcium channels in the heart and blood vessels. Effect on action potential, reduces the influx of calcium into heart cells, slowing down heart rate and relaxing blood vessels. Used to treat high blood pressure, angina, and certain heart rhythm disorders. Nifedipine function, blocks calcium channels in the heart and blood vessels. Effect on action potential, reduces calcium entry into heart cells, leading to relaxation of blood vessels and decreased workload on the heart. Used for high blood pressure and angina. Verapamil function, blocks calcium channels in the heart. Effect on action potential, slows down heart rate and reduces the strength of heart contractions by inhibiting calcium entry into cardiac cells. Used for high blood pressure, angina, and certain arrhythmias. This video was a very quick overview of the sodium-potassium pump, as well as cardiac action potential. Please be sure to continually study the portions mentioned in the video. Remember that the EMT level looks for just a quick overview of these systems. AEMT, and especially paramedics, will get in-depth. Understanding cardiac action potential will really help the paramedic understand pharmacology and rhythm interpretation and treatment to a deeper level. As before, like and subscribe if you find these videos helpful.